Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a different type of video. We're still in From the Depths, but today I figured I might as well start working on a speed build video. Because some of you guys have requested speed builds or build tutorials and similar things. So today we're going to be starting work on USS Albany, CG-10. And you can see I'm already laying out the outline of the hull here. Generally, when I'm speed building something, or not speed building, just building something, I like to start with the hull outline at the waterline and then build out from there. You'll see me use several, I'll be clicking in between tabs during this build, and it's because I'm using 3D models, and also I'm using a very handy-dandy photo measure tool, which allows me to measure dimensions using scale photos, so that way I can get everything proportioned just right. A little bit about Albany. She was originally commissioned as an Oregon City class heavy cruiser, right after World War II, I think she was launched. And you can see I'm clicking between tabs. Here's the photo measure tool I was talking about. That allows me to measure various dimensions, so I'm checking her draft here so I can get that right. Also, this is going to be one of the ugliest ships ever put afloat. I mean, you can see from the elevation drawing that I'm using for photo measure, but just be warned, because once this thing's finished, it's going to be horrid. Although, today, we're only going to be building the hull and internal systems, so the superstructure and weapons will come in a different video. Anyways, Albany was commissioned as an Oregon City class heavy cruiser, which the Oregon City class was basically just an improved Baltimore class. It had pretty much the exact same weapons layout and hull. The only difference was a slightly improved superstructure with a single funnel instead of two funnels, so that the anti-aircraft guns could have better firing arcs and stuff. So you see here, I pull up a 3D model of USS Baltimore to use as a reference because the hull was pretty much the same. But Albany was a pretty large ship. She displaced about 14,000 tons. She was 205 meters long and like 21 meters wide. Pretty sizable ship. She should be the largest ship that we have so far for our United States Navy versus Neater campaign. And she was originally commissioned in 1946. But during the 60s, the Navy decided they wanted missile cruisers. It's kind of a new technology. And rather than purpose-build some, they figured, hey, we have a ton of these cruisers from World War II lying around, let's just do conversions. So she was converted into a missile cruiser and redesignated CG-10 for Cruiser Guided Missile. And then she went on to see service all the way up until 1985, I believe, as a guided missile cruiser. So you can see right now I'm doing the hull shaping. I like to do the waterline and then build down from there to the bottom of the hull just so I can get the underwater bit shaped out perfectly. I try to avoid using a lot of decorations. You saw me earlier use a couple on the bow, but I don't plan on doing any really large scale decorations on the hull at least. I just don't find that it's worth the time and effort. So I'm just kind of shaping out the hull form here, making the outline, and then I'll put in the armor later after I just make the shell of the ship's hull. And honestly, bows of ships, at least the underwater portions, I find it pretty simple. Sterns, not so much though, and that's what I'm starting building now. You'll see me click back and forth between Baltimore quite a lot because, yeah, it took me a very long time to master doing the sterns of ships. And to be honest, I still find it kind of difficult, and I have like 2,000 hours on this game. But you see here, I'm just kind of laying out the basic shape that I'm going to go for. I realize that this is overly complex, and I simplified a bit right there. And then I start putting the slopes, and I do end up using mimics a little bit on the stern of this ship. Not mimics, decorations. They're pretty much the same thing. Anyways, you can see I am placing a couple mimics down on the bottom of the ship, just to smooth out this area. When I use decorations, I should say, when I use decorations, I like to make them easily prefabable. And if you don't know this already, you can save a block with a decoration on it as a prefab and then paste it wherever you want, and even if the block doesn't get placed, the decoration will. So you can see right here, I make a quick decoration, go to prefab mode, and now I'm prefabbing it all over the bottom of the hull. I was gonna smooth this out so it joins well with the sides of the hull, but I'm a little bit too lazy for that, and so I just leave it. It's underwater anyways, not a whole lot of people are gonna be looking at this part of the ship. Once I finish that, I just put in the skeg for the, I guess you could call it a skeg, I'm not sure what else you'd call it, that's just on here, center line, and then I simply tap the F key, fill the bottom of the ship with alloy, and now I start heading over to work on armor. So, for these modern ships, oh, and I also go and measure out the freeboard here, actually, before I work on armor. I finish the upper hull. I was about to skip that. Once again, this photo measure tool is coming in really handy. And honestly, upper hull is kind of the opposite of the lower hull in my opinion, where the stern and midsection are very easy, but the bow is where it gets a little bit more difficult. I think this measured out to about 6 meters of freeboard, which is kind of a lot, but not anything precarious. So I will start building in the upper hull and just filling this in. It's honestly pretty simple. Aside from the stern, which I build out backwards just a little bit, as you can see I'm doing right here. Small amount of shaping going in here. The rest of it is just flat up and down until you get to the bow. But we will get there in a couple seconds. Okay, so now that I'm working on the bow, you see I measure out how far it sticks forward, which isn't that much actually, it's like 2 meters. But you will notice this ship has a raised bow. The bow is about 2 meters higher than the rest of the ship, and that's going to require a slope. And normally I resort to spin block bows in this case, which is pretty simple in explanation. You just put a spin block, set it to a angle, and then you build the bow deck on that spin block, and that way you get a nice smooth slope rather than the kind of blocky slope that you would get if you just used metal beams from the Depths inventory. So in this case, I'm building up the sides of the hull around the bow, just filling in the little nooks and crannies left by the metal transition blocks that I'm using. And then I place a little heavy armor thing so the spin block doesn't break. And then I place 2 spin blocks. And the reason I place 2 is because a spin block placed on a spin block will be able to clip through objects. So it just makes it easier to get the angle for the bow correct, because I can adjust it after the block has already been placed, if that makes sense. I don't have to just calculate the angle immediately and then build on there. So I pretty much just build out to the sides of the ship, See, I'm messing around with paint in a little bit. At the end of the video, I'm going to end up just stealing the paint scheme colors off of the spruance, I'm pretty sure. But I build out the shape of the deck that I want over this part of the bow, make a couple little adjustments, and then once I have the outline outlined, I will simply connect everything so it stops saying that it's disconnected and turning pink. And then I'll head over to the spin block and change the angle a little bit so it lines up perfectly. So there you go, you get a nice smooth slope. After that, all you have to do is just fill in the gaps essentially and connect the deck over to the hull. Now the one downside to this system really is if the spin block that this is on gets hit, the entire deck will fall off. So I did wrap mine in heavy armor as you saw, but that's not exactly perfect. I've had situations where I'll take like a single large missile or something just in an unfortunate space and the whole bow peels off. But you know, it looks cool. So there you go. I'm kind of showing off the hull. You can see the bow slope is nice and smooth. And now I start doing armor and internals. So you see I'm scrolling through the Wikipedia here trying to find its armor layout and armor thickness. I end up having to click over to the class in general, actually, the Oregon City class. But I think it stated 6 inches. And the armor, the way I'm modeling armor for this playthrough is going to be the same way that I model it in the Finest Hour campaign. Basically, every 2 inches of steel a ship has in real life adds 1 meter of either metal or alloy. And then ships also get an additional meter of metal or alloy just as the outer hull. So 6 inches of belt armor in this case puts our Albany at 4 meters of metal and alloy in total, although I choose to make one of those layers metal poles, just for added protection against heat and hesh. I know there have been some videos and stuff coming out about how poles aren't perfect at stopping shape charge jets or hesh spalling, but the odds of, in order for a shape charge to penetrate through a layer of poles, it has to hit the poles at a perfect 90-degree angle that lines up with the so it doesn't hit either of the air gaps on either side of the pole. And the odds of that actually happening during a battle in From the Depths are very low. You're almost never going to be absolutely completely perpendicular to the enemy that's firing at you. So I tend to just use poles anyways. They have in my experience, they have like a 99% success rate at stopping shape charge penetrators. The other thing you might notice is I don't use my hotbar. I honestly, until like a couple months ago, didn't even realize From the Depths had a hotbar. You can see it down at the bottom. It's got a couple things equipped to it. And it's funny too, because when I was really little, like in elementary school, I had Minecraft on PC. And of course in Minecraft, like you have to use your hotbar, and I got really good at it. And then, you know, several years later, more than several years later, like over a decade later, I'm now playing From the Depths, and yeah, I did not use my hotbar at all. So if you are playing From the Depths or starting or something, I really recommend using your hotbar because it's super helpful. So you can see right now I'm putting in the AI and ammunition and engines, various other internal modules. I do put a kind of an alloy like holding bulkhead type thing around the engines and AIs. And I also coat the AIs in rubber, which since they changed EMP, rubber has the highest EMP protection, I guess, of any structural block in the game. So I decided I'm going to use rubber rather than stone like I normally do. This inner alloy bulkhead, honestly, probably won't do that much, but if you're taking a hit from like a large explosive or something, or maybe even frag that penetrates the belt, it should stop it. If there's like a kinetic railgun or something shooting at you, or like a high-powered cram, if it punched through the 4-meter thick belt already, that single layer of alloy is probably not going to stop it, but it's there just for emotional support, kind of. I do route the exhaust from the engines out the bottom of the ship. That's really not realistic at all, but if I have to route them out the actual funnels or out the top deck in general, the chance of the exhaust pipes getting severed goes way up, and then the engines shut off. So I will not be doing that, but in the meantime, I'm just slapping down some fuel tanks, dividing the Citadel up into internal compartments. That's the other thing. You might notice I've really only protected about maybe 60 or probably like 70% of the ship's length with actual armor. The Oregon City class in real life used the all or nothing armor scheme. So they had very thick armor over the vital areas of the ship, and the bow and stern and upper belt area got pretty much no armor. So I'm emulating that in From the Depths. I do find that this type of armor scheme works pretty well in From the Depths, because even more so than in real life, the main issue with all or nothing armor schemes is you have to make sure you have enough reserve buoyancy inside of your protected Citadel, because the rest of your ship will take damage and get flooded very easily. In From the Depths, it's extremely easy to build a ship that can stay afloat without even any air pumps. Like, you can just have your ship get shot to Swiss cheese and it'll keep floating. So with that main drawback out of the way, if you need to save cost and don't really care if the whole front of your ship gets blown off and it looks ugly sometimes, the all or nothing armor scheme is the way to go. You also might notice I put 2 armor decks here. Well, at least I put a lower alloy deck, and then I'm going to put an upper alloy deck above this. You honestly don't have to do this, and I'm not sure if the cruiser had this. I know some of the American battleships had kind of they had a main armor deck, and then they had a thin splinter deck, like a level below that, to catch any fragments in case some make it through the main armor deck. And From the Depths, it basically just means large explosives that hit the main deck armor won't penetrate into the vital components below that. And also shells and things that punch through the upper section of the armor belt are just going to detonate in the space in between the 2 armor decks, and they won't be able to damage any of the internal components. So, I don't know, I find that helpful. Whether or not you want to actually do this, you don't have to. None of the destroyers that I've built for this campaign series have the double armor deck, because there's just not enough space. They all have super shallow draft and skinny hulls. I'm just slapping in some quick roll control propulsion here because, well, I mean, you guys saw the design blueprints for Albany. You know how tall she is. That's definitely going to come in handy later on. And now I'm just drawing up lines to compartmentalize the bow and stern and putting in air pumps. Now that I have the hull pretty much completed, I am spawning in a spruance. Why? Because I want to steal its paint scheme. And the other thing with this build that makes it kind of unique and a little bit simple, this is pretty much a missile-only ship. So normally, like if I was building a Baltimore class something, or even a normal Oregon City class cruiser, Fitting the gun barbettes in, especially to the bow where the hull gets skinny up by the front of the ship, and maintaining enough armor to give them adequate protection would be kind of a big issue. But luckily, I'm building Albany, and this is, like I said, pretty much a missile-only ship. So having to armor up large, spacious gun barbettes, and yeah, pretty much just the APS gun barbettes, I don't have to invest in that, which makes the ship much easier. So anyways, that's the hull and internals complete, and I will be back for part 2 sometime